myself fired up now. I'm just going to take you through a little bit about the River Ure and the history of the Ure. Because I know there's a lot of people, usually when I give a talk, people know all about the river, but I think there's quite a lot of faces in the room today that don't know much about it. There's a massive commercial fishery at the start of the 20th century. About 30 tonnes of fish caught in some years, up to 5,000 fish. Those were the big multi-sea winter fish that were captured in the nets down at Naburn. Naburn's the tidal limit of the Yorkshire Roos, just below York. That was a 54-pounder caught in 1936. The Ure system is notorious for big fish, and until recently we've seen a lot of big fish in the system every year. Not so many now though. Those were the catches in the 19th century, well, 19th century coming into the 20th century. Wasn't without problems. There was a lot of industrial pollution going into the Humber and the tidal loos. But you can see, and you find this on all the northeast rivers, when you come to, it's not going to work unless we close the curtains, you come to the start of the Second World War and you see a crash in numbers, and that happened on all the rivers on the east side of the country. Happened in the Wear and the Tyne, and even the Tweed to a certain extent. Not really sure what caused that, but we all suppose it was something to do with the war effort. In the 90s, when I worked for the Environment Agency, we started to pick salmon up at the major weirs. That was Naburn Weir, electrofishing there in 1999. Time's cruel, isn't it? So this photograph.
It's amazing how some people look younger as they get older.
makes me feel a bit weaker than usual, Yeah, so we started catching fish, and it was really exciting for us because really the Yorkshire region, and Graham Pearson is in the audience will remember that, was mainly a coarse fish region, and we concentrated on coarse fish population. And we started to see these salmon starting to appear in the ooze, so it was an exciting time for everybody. I took this picture standing in the water for 4 hours with a dry suit on to get that picture, and this was used on salmon strategies all over the UK. And I was never given credit for it, so I'm going to say we made improvements to fish passes. That was sort of a homemade fish pass we put on Westwick Weir. That was later turned into a fully accredited pass about 5 years later. It did work to a certain extent. The reason why we started seeing salmon coming back, if you look down the left-hand side, you can see the 1980s. There was significant periods of time when the dissolved oxygen was below the lethal level in the tidal ooze. So the smolts going out were getting hammered by low oxygen levels, and the adults were getting hit when they tried to come back. You get to the late 80s and into the 90s, and you see that nearly all the time, it's above that lethal level. So that's why we started to see more fish. We were getting wanderers coming through. Apparently the fish that are coming to the Tweed and the Tyne hit the coast further down around the Humber and move up the coast, and we were picking up some of those fish as strays. I did a full red count in 2001. I walked and swam and sort of paddled the whole river with a GPS, and I worked out where the salmon was spawning in the Ure system. And there was quite a few reds. It was quite promising, and it looked like the river was coming back quite well. Ure Salmon Trust was formed. I was currently manager at the Trent Rivers Trust, and I was persuaded to come back up to work for the Ure Salmon Trust as it was then. We did lots of habitat work. We got lots of money from North Yorkshire Council. We got a big grant from them. Working closely with the Rivers Trust, the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust, we did a lot of work. We fenced off tens of kilometres of spawning streams and main river as well. We put in solar powered drinking systems and did lots of habitat enhancement work, trying to improve the in-stream habitat, channel constrictors, making the channel more complex. Weir removals, we removed this major weir on the River Burn system, and I get some criticism for this because I was only supposed to take the middle out, but we got a bit carried away, and there was a big crack, you see, so we had to take it all out in the end, and so we ended up with that. But that was an incredible thing. Straight away, the salmon spawned above where that weir was. And what we also found is, you can see the amount of gravel, tens of thousands of tonnes of gravel were held up for over a kilometre behind that weir. They moved down through the Burn system, and we got lots and lots of reds in the Burn for about 2 to 3 years. The Burn, by the way, is below 2 big reservoirs, so very effective gravel traps, so there's very little gravel of the right size range in the River Burn. So releasing that weir and that gravel made a huge difference. For a few years, then the gravel moved on. Right, before stocking can commence, we decided to open a hatchery, and at the time, I think it's fair to say I was a little sceptical as whether stocking would work. This was back in 2012. I decided to give it a go because that's what they wanted me to do, and I'll come on to it later, but I was quite amazed how effective it proved to be. So you need to get a stocking plan, this is in England, you need to get a stocking plan approved by the Environment Agency. And in the early stages, we got stocking plans approved, and things were going relatively well. DEFRA needs to accredit your facility to make sure you're doing things properly. But the stocking guidance, I'm going to have to be honest about the stocking guidance. Eddie's been honest about what he thinks about the regulatory agencies. The stocking guidance is not fit for purpose. It may have been fit for purpose just 20 years ago, but the way things are now, it just doesn't fit. You know, numbers of salmon are dropping off a cliff now, and all that hasn't worked. Habitat work now obviously helps salmon numbers. Fish passage, I've worked on huge fish pass schemes, £750,000, and that's worked, that's helped, but it hasn't stopped the decline. So I'm going to be calling for a bit more to do with that later on. So you need a hatchery facility.
So have you found, so do you mind me?
Yeah, it's fine.
Have you found that working with the, or not working with the agencies has become more difficult over the last few years in how you're treated and
I think it varies from region to region. I think, and we'll find that out today with the speaker from the Loom. It can be area specific, shall we say. But, yeah, so you need a facility. We had 2 big 4-metre tanks in a former old trout hatchery. You need some money. So we had the imitable Michael Charlton Weedy, who cycled from the Humber Bridge to Aysgarth Falls to earn money for us, which was an incredible thing. He's in his 70s at the time. There he is at Aysgarth with his pint of feastings. We had fundraising dinners, and we had some celebrity support. We had Nick Hancock there, and we've got Jeremy here with us today. So we've had quite a lot of people helping us with this and helping raise the profile of what we were doing. And then you need broodstock. That was the 2nd biggest fish caught in England in 2012. Weighed 36 pounds, and that, when I looked at the scales, it was a spring fish, so that probably came in as a 40-pounder in the spring, or certainly very close to 40 pounds. Some people recognise that gentleman. Yes, he's here. Wake up! There's a picture of you here. So you need to look after your broodstock. I'm going back to basics here. I'm just basically whizzing through and showing you what we did. So you keep the broodstock until the hen fish have ovulated, and then you can anaesthetise the fish and you can strip the eggs. So we used a commercial trout hatchery, and that gentleman's in the audience here, and they were very kind to us. They did a very preferential price. We did that because the water supply at the original hatchery was compromised during flood conditions. So we used this hatchery. I'll name him Johnny Jowett, he won't be embarrassed. We got those fish back usually the first week in June. Now this is quite an interesting point. Well, it's interesting from an academic point of view. All the speakers today have done it differently. All these speakers have done the whole process differently, and they've all got good results. So I think that tells you something about how stocking can work. We get them at 1 gram first week in June, and we would grow them hard. We had spring water at 14 degrees, which is a perfect temperature for growing young salmon. We grow them until September, the end of September. Then they were destined to go into a semi-natural rearing pond, which had 2 gallons of water, the second going through it, spring water. Doesn't look very appetising there, but when we're actually making it. Clip the fish. Every fish that we put in there was clipped. We didn't just clip a proportion, we clipped all of them. We had big teams of people doing that, and some of those people are still alive, shall I say. We had a great time. I think this is something to stress, really. This is a huge resource. All the people in this room want to do something. They want to help. You know, they give their time freely. People give their money freely as well. That needs to be harnessed. You know, the regulatory authorities, well, in England, it's the Environment Agency, needs to listen to this and needs to utilise it. Anyway, preach over. So we had big teams of people clipping. This smolt pond was netted for predators, full of natural food, full of gammarus, full of chironomids. It was absolutely fizzing with natural food. The person who took this video is in the audience as well today. But those were our smolts prior to release. They're behaving, I think they're behaving as smolts would behave in a small tarn. If you imagine a small river system in Scotland or Scandinavia and you had small tarns in the system, those fish are all swimming together in a shoal and behaving in a pelagic way, and that was just prior to release. We used to feed them for 2 weeks prior to release. We used to put quite a bit of food in to try and get the condition factor higher. I think that's a big feature. And I think maybe there's another gentleman here who does it. I think that's important. I think putting those fish out to sea with a little bit of extra condition can be essential, because there's quite a bit of evidence with fish caught in the migration lanes that they're very emaciated and they're actually going backwards on the way to Greenland. So that could be one of the reasons why we had such a good return rate. If you're sad enough like me, you can look at this video. This is our fish counter. We actually run a fish counter as well. That's not in reverse. That's how they go down a fish pass. How vulnerable does that make smolts to going down a fish pass when the birds are weighing at the bottom? So it can be obviously very precarious. You can actually pick out some of those smolts were our smolts that were clipped because they've mixed in with a wild fish. Right, this is where things, in my opinion, and this is I think it's the opinion of everybody at the YDSG, this is where things started to go wrong. We started to catch fish. One season, a quarter of the fish that were caught on this beat were from the hatchery. A quarter. Now I think there's a lot of underreporting goes on, because the amount of pictures I've received from anglers saying, oh, look at this fish I've caught. Have you missed anything? No, I didn't post him. So I think a lot get missed, so it's only going to be higher than that. Quarter of the fish caught on this beat in 1 year from the hatchery, minimum, probably more than that. It all started to go badly wrong there. They wanted us to drop the smolt pond system because they said the fish would be domesticated within the smolt pond. I didn't agree. They wanted us to do targeted stocking. So we looked at Water Framework Directive. Anybody heard of Water Framework Directive? Yeah. And the Water Framework Directive draws a polygon around a water body and comes up with a status for that water body. It was a European directive, now adopted in British law. That was failing, that water body, and this one too, for an absence of salmon. So we went in, we stocked big autumn par into those catchments. We predicted when they would come back. This man here saw them come back, he saw them spawn, and then the following year we electrofished and we found salmon. So the first time in living memory, salmon were recorded in those streams at that level. Because further down the River Lava there were salmon, but this was high up and this was kept back. First time ever recorded. So you think the local environment agency team, they go out and do the survey, they find salmon, that water body's upgraded to favourable status. Everybody's a winner. We get a pat on the back for doing the work, and they get a pat on the back for raising the status. No. So effectively, the last stocking plan we tried was rejected, and then we tried again. I'll name the person that put a lot of effort into this, Roger Trees, who's part of our group, and others put a lot of effort into this. And it wasn't rejected by the local environment agency team, it was eviscerated. It was torn to shreds. It was thrown back at us, and they just said, basically, we didn't know what we were talking about. They've even sent us messages along the lines of salmon need, apparently, this is amazing to me, salmon need clean water, clean gravel, and they need to be able to get to it. So they're sort of dumbing it down to this level, and to be honest, it's just insulting, it really is. We've had a lot of supporters. We had the King visitors who visit the project. Rishi's been very supportive, or tried to be supportive. And Ori was a supporter all the way through. And I'm sure you all know who that man is. So, this is my idea, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, that this is why we're in the position we are today with stocking. Why is stocking such a dirty word? Why do people go like this from the regulatory authorities when you talk about stocking? 2001 time report, I believe the conclusions in that report to be inaccurate. And I'm not on my own with that. There are people much better qualified than I am who believe that there are inaccuracies in that report. And the inaccuracies are mainly the influence of the Kielder scheme on the recovery of the time is much greater than had been previously thought. They were talking about a figure, and we got this figure thrown at us on numerous occasions, 0.3%. That's all that will come back. We were releasing well-adapted smolts, we were releasing them when the river was up, so they could mix in with the wild smolt drop and they could get away without being predated on too heavily because the river was up. And I think we were getting a return rate, this is from, I think it's an educated guess, I think we were getting anything between 3 and 4% of those back as adults. I think we were getting a really good return on those smolts. I think we had to be, otherwise we wouldn't have seen that many, because all the regular rods on the river caught clipped fish. There's an anti-stocking bias within the fishery science community in the UK. I think that is a fact. You talk about stocking. We even showed people pictures of clipped fish and they went like that and pushed the picture away.
Their present chairman's against it.
Sorry?
Atlantic Salmon Trust, Peter,
yes.
He's against it.
Yeah.
And he's the chairman of it.
So, what they do, they quote, there's overwhelming evidence that it's damaging and dangerous. If you interfere with the reproductive cycle of a wild animal, you've got to have some kind of impact. So you've got to be careful. What Eddie alluded to earlier about Pacific salmon, 6 billion Pacific salmon were stocked into the Pacific one year. 6 billion, can you imagine that? They fired them directly into the sea. They didn't know what catchment they'd come from, what river they'd come from. They've changed now. What the EA were talking about was an extinction vortex. They said if you do that kind of thing, there will be an extinction vortex, and they were talking about Pacific salmon would disappear. Try and stop Atlantic salmon in the same way, they will disappear. Hasn't happened. It wasn't the best way to do it, but it hasn't happened. So, if you start looking for papers, they are for other species of salmon, but they are for salmon. They're there. There are other papers there that say you can do stuff and you don't damage the genetics. Some would argue, if you do fully factorial fertilisation when you're doing the stocking, you can actually increase the number of families. There's certainly that possibility.
Sorry Dave, what was that phrase you used? Fully...
Extinction vortex?
No, fully factorial or something?
Fully factorial fertilisation. Yeah. I'll let Berdo explain that, because there's a lot better.
Tell my wife that all the time.
It's to do with juggling eggs, isn't it, Berdo? So, I'm not going to hold back on this one. What's the point? We're shut down anyway, so at the moment. A complete and unbiased review of salmon stocking in the UK, looking at successes and failures. We're not asking for that, we're demanding that. That has to happen. Extensive tagging study comparing the survival of captive reared smolts v wild smolts. That's my own personal thing. If we'd have been able to do that, I think we would have been able to prove that we had a tremendous return rate on our smolts. So that's a personal thing, that's for me. Complete rethink, restocking guidance and licensing of facilities. The stocking guidance needs ripping up and it needs starting again. We had it peer reviewed by somebody I'm not going to embarrass, who was in this room, and he said he used to advise government, embarrassing him further. He said if any of his staff had written the EA stocking guidance, he would have told them to go away, rip it up and start again. So that is what people who are very well qualified to look at that document say about it. Gene banking. We're going to have to do this because, as Eddie alluded to, it'll take several years before any of us can get going. I mean, literally it'll be sort of 5-6 years before we could start having any kind of effect at all, probably even 7 years. We're not getting any younger. So we need those permissions now, but we also need to gene bank as well to try and save the genetic diversity that the regulatory authorities hold so dearly and say that you've not got to touch, there will be no genetic diversity left when there are no fish left. There won't be any genetic diversity. It won't exist. Sorry, I'll take my blood pressure pills after. NASCO say there needs to be, rivers need to be kept above the conservation limit. There was a recent meeting, apparently all the countries that attended were told to go back and look at ways of enhancing the stocks in their rivers, in the countries that they work in. Hasn't really happened here, has it? Things they were supposed to look at were reconditioning kelps, which I'm not so sure about, catching smolts, growing them onto adult size, spawning them. They didn't mention the dreaded S word. They couldn't bring themselves to actually say stocking properly, I don't think. But that's what they were coming round to, and that's what they're going to have to come round to. Yeah, implement those guidelines. It's not a time for inaction and more research. Research is good. It's always to know, always good to know exactly what's going on. It's now time for action. We've got to act, otherwise this amazing species that we all love could disappear. David Attenborough actually said that, and everybody respects David Attenborough. He said that within this generation, or even half a generation, salmon could disappear in the UK. So just keep that in your minds. So that's it. That's it from me. So I'll.